Chilly here with Sirius Taurus Moon, Mars hour, Venus day. Mars is 2020 in Aries. Ascendant Leo with Sun in the 10th house in Taurus. Um, oh gosh, solar returns for people. And I also had a terrible solar return. So, um, yeah, oh no, Mars is 22 in for a solar return. Yikes. Um, Venus and Sun semi-sextile. Well, my solar return had ascendant Gemini, and Mercury is in the 12th. Now, here is something that came up because having Mercury in the 12th is kind of like having a Mercury retrograde. This is the time where, by the way, I put the Doritos underneath the sink for some reason. I have no idea. It can make people a little bit more susceptible to nervous system hack. By the way, also, Pisces with a 12th house Aquarius, so that's like that. Our 12th house is Aquarius. Um, so a Taurus sun, but a Pisces ascendant. And here is something that I actually ponder about because, yeah, I have a solar return with ascendant Gemini and Mercury in the 12th house, which means that um, there is some sort of 12th housey things to do with memory, speech. Um, this is why I talked about this. I think this is how a secular energy reading came about um, because there are all these 12th house things, and the ruler of the ascendant in the 12th is kind of like a person is both in the um, pre-physical dimension and in the physical dimension. So um, they kind of get to be the observer in the scene, which is a form of dissociation. Um, Now, this is all while I do have a big transit Pluto to my 12th house, so it accentuates on things, but it also something that I wonder about. Is it really just the solar year? Um, or is it that I'm aging to a time where, because Chiron Gemini can also be a wound around. Now, I just addressed what's the underlying factors of that wound around, but there's something very, you know, um, I remember when Jonathan Geffen talked about his hearing impediment and the lightness of it. Now, I don't know where was it for him, but Gemini rules the ears. Now it's very more toddler phase or inner child phase, and then we kind of have to, there's the sovereignty question, and then it's kind of like, well, we're tending to that because the people that make the big money decisions um, do that to toddlers. And they were also the toddlers, so they're not like more sovereign. And then you run into that, and you're like, well, 42 is a young age, but it's also, think about turning 50 with Chiron in Gemini. It's kind of like, well, Chiron is the ears, is the speech, is the compartmentalized parts of the memory. She a 10, but actually knows language acquisition. um, Neurodivergence, of course. All kinds of neurological. Actually, I was looking at. how should I say that? No, how should I say? What was the name of the name? Forgetting, of course. But with that, we're unfortunately with trauma. But I think my lineage has a memory of physiognomy because I would begin to see the different compartmentalized parts of the facial expression and somehow how do they relate to what the person's been through. My mother had this. Then in 2007, I began to have this. Um, and yeah, I remember when I was just 20, there was I was working at work. A lady said that I look like a lady that's been through a lot, and I was 21. So I hope I'm not gonna outright say that to people, but as people age, and so it's both like tending to the toddler phase and the as people age thingies. And the as people age, it feels like retirement. It feels like retirement from life. Um, and and it's funny because I'm only 42. So then I get all these advertisements about like the hair, and I'm like, oh, people were eating, they were making mixtures. If my mom fears the mellow, they were making mixtures of walnuts, but the walnut and the the peel of the walnut when it's fresh. How am I going to get a peel of walnut when it's fresh? But there are things that are actually making a hair look better, but the hair is also our roots. So, and you know what's funny? I'm the kind of person that would not even look for that, and then it just shows up in my feed. Or I look at, I don't know, I was looking for something with Angelica and a tincture, and then I see this weird plant, and I'm like, what's that weird plant? Oh, it's a story about a guy that began to eat from this plant, and then his gray hair got. Uh, I'm like, okay. But because it's roots and because it is basically well-being related, then that is where my interest is more than like mere aesthetics. Um, it's the joy of, because I don't think that, let's say, white hair is better or less, but it's when it's kind of like, oh, it's a form of nourishment, then it's, oh, then that makes sense. Um, so as per the astrology, I kind of think that with Rahu Chirons, with both of them in Gemini, and that would not be a lot of people because Chiron ingressed into Gemini around 1984, did the back and forth, maybe 83. So those that still have Rahu in Gemini, cope. Um, but this is where the wound can be around, or the wound of upbringing can lead to in adulthood neurolinguistical, memory related, and hearing related issues. Now, I used to read Oliver Sacks a lot, and a lot of energy reading is just dealing with that. It's looking at that from a language when people talk and they have like a different accent, and they would say, "I really love the way that people would speak their language in a foreign language." And when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to study that. Um, so um, Actually, universal grammar addressed that from where do they put the things in the tree. But it's also kind of interesting to see how different languages and different thought patterns. I do have a correction because I said if the people don't have a certain word for something now, when it is about like trauma related things, they might not have a word for that because they didn't know how to name that. So that's kind of like my correction of also just like astrology, when we study language, there is a context um, um, to that. Um, but the wound is probably relating to the toddlerhood with Chiron, because Chiron is kind of like the birth wound. Where was Chiron when we were born? Now, I'm not sure when we talk about Chiron, because entire astrology field originated from looking at the stars to predict them for elections, for rituals, today would probably call it, probably rightfully so. Then my entire field was created in that context. And so Chiron, while it can definitely facilitate understanding, we might also want to conceive of a world where there isn't ritual abuse, and then perhaps the entire component of Chiron would be completely different. It might be a person travels. You think about a person that travels, let's say, um, there was this couple that she's Vietnamese and he is German, and she would travel after a while. She went to study in Germany, got a husband. Actually got the husband when he visited Vietnam. And then she came back to her parents for a while, and she said she would sometimes feel the food would feel weird to her. Um, so you think about Chiron as, let's say, traveling somewhere, and you have to comprise of different medicine. By the way, it's very relevant for our times if it's expedition time. And so um, they say that the Europeans that emigrated to the Americas, a lot of what killed the First Nations, even before anything was planned, was simply different things that the natives didn't know. Um, and later they began to use it as a weapon. So, like they, um, more things that I can think in that context. Taking into account that healing the chironic wound is healing something in society, because it's a 50-year cycle of a planet. It's kind of it's kind of a mini generational planet. Um, so in Gemini, it could affect the hearing, language, speech, um, memory, and and it's likely a form of dissociation, some sort of neuro-linguistical dissociation. And then one would see where the Mercury is. So it's kind of both coming to my 42 year and Mercury in the 12th house, where there is something that is lost, but also a hidden blessing regarding these things. Again, it's a result of prolonged trauma, but it's the way of the nervous system to maintain itself in the fourth of in in the face of um, not aging, but actually the world. But again, nobody's going to have any excuses for why we couldn't change the world when the world is changing so much. Um, when I think about memory loss or even what people call Alzheimer, where it's kind of like a part of, now people say, oh, part of the soul is already incarnated elsewhere or kind of like crossed over, um, and then a person is there, but it can also be, and I haven't thought about it, but pretty much for my birthday I got myself angelica oil, which is about the wish to be here, um, and it's kind of like healing from the angels. Now we are dealing with the world that's so ritually abusive. Particularly angelica is associated with archangel Michael, and then there is this notion of, yeah, that oil is definitely given the effect of wanting to be here, um, and that lightness where the nervous system compensates or dissociates, because Gemini is an air sign, and it's kind of like the loss of those capacities, um, um, kind of brings something else. Now the Chiron Geminis is kind of like Chiron Rahu. Chiron is like 50, so people think about age 50 as kind of like, well, we're somewhat getting old. um, but age 42, when you think about Rahu and Rahu maturation, is kind of like the second part of life, more than, oh, we're getting old. But then Chiron Rahu is kind of like, I'm just tending to my inner child, and boom, I'm getting old. I'm having old people's issues, and it feels enlightening. It feels it feels reasonable. It feels safe. It feels um, there's some sort of life within all this. Um, it feels like a big escape. So, um, there's also a sense of, like, now, because it's kind of like with Chiron Rao is happening at 42 rather than at 50. So it's kind of like, why is 42 years old person in my age is still considered like that person is psychotic. I was like, no, I'm just getting old. No, you're not. You're 42. Thank you. Uh, and then, even the talk about euthanasia receives a different, more peaceful perspective. It's like you can talk about euthanasia relating to old age issues. But it's also that lightness of wanting to be here with maybe it's the angelica oil, but but if so, maybe I need to keep keep having angelica oil. Um, um, there is something peaceful about that. Either that or Mercury is just in Taurus. But it's for a solar return chart, so um, and it's a Venus day still, which gives it a little bit of. If I think about the Venus days, there's something where um, it's kind of like the not as used to be is okay. Um, Speaking about angelica oil, probably all the things that they say about the archetype of a person growing older and the archetype of a toddler are very true. Um, and I actually, with this Gemini, with his Gemini power, I don't feel like getting into the deep stuff around that I've already talked about. Um, but it's just kind of remote. Like I'm so accepting this old lady vibes. Um, and if I buy this tincture that makes the hair looks black, I will try that. I don't remember how it Xiao Wu, something like that. It's supposed to make the hair look uh the white hair look, and I would never think about it, but it's um and so it's kind of like moving from that age where the curiosity about the patterns was, to that age was like remote. It was like just the accepting of the patterns. Um, it's like, oh, growing old. Um, so yeah, I think there was this issue where I was, lying in my bed, kind of like wondering if that's how I'll die, and um, um, and it was like, oh, everything is so overwhelming, and then I just accept that I go into old lady mode.